Hi, everybody. So this week, your task is to go through and revise your introduction and your literature review based on feedback from me on your introduction and based on feedback from me on your literature review, which I will be providing Monday and Tuesday evening. So you may have some questions potentially about either how to revise your introduction or literature review, or just maybe some simple logistics about like how the two connect, or how the literature review should be somewhat of a duplication, but just an expansion of the introduction. So we're going to go over that a little bit this evening. So as a reminder, just kind of a basic outline for the research proposal of Project 3. It's going to have these 8 components. It's going to have the introduction that has the problem and its investigation, the statement of the problem, the rationale, assumptions, the research focus, then the literature review, some type of suggestion for how one might fix or propose to fix the problem that has been kind of presented with your research question and topic, and then your conclusion, which kind of wraps everything up. All right, so you'll see that under week 8, there's going to be 2 student examples that are posted that are working drafts of the introduction and literature review. So as always, in these 2 examples, literature review 1 and literature review, these are student examples. They're still working on revising and editing their introduction and their literature review, but at least it gives you a sense as to where you should or may be at this point of the game. Pretty close to kind of having a very focused and clear research problem, and have a very clear understanding as how to your research that you've been finding integrates into your introduction and literature review, and how you use the sources within the introduction and literature review to be able to establish a particular research question. So like, what is my research question? To establish why this research question is important, to discuss how past researchers have looked at and attempted to address this research question, and then looking at what those findings are, what the suggestions are for fixing that particular research question. And so you'll see in these students' examples different types of moves for those. So the first student example is about midwifery, and kind of this idea of like midwives and their role in providing a delivery experience that is outside of the realm of traditional delivery practices. And so you'll see that the student does a very good job of including a fair amount of like, citations and so forth in order to establish the student's research question, as well as, very specific research questions that will be asked, and then the assumptions and limitations. But one thing that you will potentially want to like pay attention to is in the literature review, the student does a good job of using headings by kind of like first starting out really broad by saying, all right, what is midwifery versus traditional delivery kind of practices? And so the student kind of gives a very nice overview of that. And so when you're doing your literature review, obviously you start out from broad and you move more and more specific, right? And the first thing is to use your definitions that you've laid out in your introduction, and to use kind of the problem its investigation to expand upon what is this research problem or topic. And then the student then goes into a subset of like the differences between traditional versus non-traditional delivery practices, to look at pain management and how the two differ, or the two are better than one is better than the other. and then more and more specific, the student then goes into when or how there are vaginal versus cesarean sections between midwifery and traditional delivery practices. And then the student goes into the idea of stress and anxiety regarding delivery, and which is more prevalent or which tends to be more of a problem in the aspect of midwifery versus traditional delivery practices. And as you can see, then the student is still working on kind of getting to the final kind of like pros and cons section and conclusion. And at this point, you may kind of be at that point, right, where you still kind of have a few missing pieces. Whereas with the student example with this is a student example from mortuary science that's talking about Creutzfeldt-Jacobs disease, which is a degenerative disease that occurs in morticians who work with flesh that has a particular kind of like bacteria in it. And so as you can see, again, the student follows the introduction template and has a nice list of their problems, their citations, their assumptions and limitations and terms. And then again, just like the other student, they have particular headings that helps them to kind of outline from broad to specific. So it'll start off very broad by saying, what is this disease and how is it something that is important? So kind of the what and the why from the problem of its investigation. What is it and why is this something we should be aware of, right? And so you'll see the student takes a fair amount of time to look into that. Once they've established the what and the why, they go into kind of the how, where they talk about how can we prevent this disease, and then goes into a discussion about their conclusion. And you'll see one of the reasons that I use this example also was because the student brings in questions that they have that are still kind of trying to come up with ideas for like wrapping everything up or establishing a conclusion. And so I highly recommend doing this kind of move where if you're kind of stuck somewhere or there's places within your introduction or literature review that you're not quite sure how to revise or expand or do something different with, you either do something like this where you put in a different color text or in kind of like a word, comment feature questions to me so that I can provide you feedback in a way that is going to be most helpful for you. Because next week is going to be the peer review. And so you're going to get feedback from your peers, right? But obviously you want feedback from me in order to kind of help you along as well. Okay, so I really, at this point in the game, your template, your introduction template should be pretty solid. You should have had enough feedback from me and then kind of look at student examples and time to revise. That at least you're at like a clear research focused kind of framework. Your literature review may or may not have some holes or gaps in them, which is okay. I will be bringing those up when I look over your submissions. And then obviously you will use my feedback in order to do that revision. So remember, this is a 2 revision process. I'm not going to look over your introduction and give the same type of feedback that I gave on your original introduction. If I've seen changes and those changes are great, or if I haven't seen any changes and those changes are needed, I'll make comments saying, hey, remember my feedback on the introduction template, these things need to happen. Please refer back to my prior comments. I'm not going to re-comment on it unless there's been significant change of whatever it may be. So keep that in mind. You need to make sure that you're proactive on that account. As for your literature review, obviously, it's the first time that you've turned it in, and so I'll be providing pretty detailed feedback on that. And so the next step in this game is to kind of use both my feedback on your introduction, whether it be initial feedback on your introduction template, or you've done significant revision of the introduction, I've provided feedback, and obviously the feedback on your literature review to revise and submit for peer review. And so really what you want to make sure is that your introduction is following that clear template and you're using that template in order to move from broad to specific. The problem investigation, that's the what and the why, right? The research questions, assumptions, and limitations really drive your literature review. What are the research questions that I've posted? I'm using those to kind of like work through those 3 or 4 categories of your research question in order to come to the assumptions, conclusion, and limitations, right? So you're using your research questions and your rationale section to really kind of develop your literature review in order to, at the end, say, see, this research does allow me to say that my assumptions of A, B, and C were valid or were not valid, and that my limitations, the way that I decided to focus my research question, is important because it allows us to understand or suggest or fix X, Y, and Z. As always, if you have any questions, email me, you can text me. If you'd like to meet with me in person or online, send me a notification and we'll figure that out as well. All right. You guys have all been doing great. And so I don't envision really any problems. But again, whatever you need, I'm here.